Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to my speech. I appreciate the fact that everyone came out tonight. I just want to say I really appreciate it. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt uttered these words before Congress after one of the most devastating attacks to ever take place on American soil. This malicious attack led America straight into the grips of World War II and forever changed history as we know it. Having served in the Navy in Pearl Harbor myself, I personally observed the aftermath of the attack on the Japanese, and I know just what kind of horrors war can bring. What you see on the screen before you is an image of the USS O'Kane, a destroyer homeported out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, just feet away from the Arizona Memorial and the ships at Battleship Row. She was the ship I proudly served aboard during my time in the service. Now I've completed extensive research into everything that took place that fateful day, and I've examined some of the reasons why Japan would ever devise such a plan to bring chaos and destruction to an American possession. As a military veteran and as a patriot of this great nation, I believe it is my responsibility to inform those that do not know or do not understand the attacks that happened on Pearl Harbor. I believe history should be taught to all manner of people so that undesirable events will not go repeated. The bombing of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by the Japanese was a truly devastating attack. Today we will explore what happened the day of the attack and what led up to the events that took place. After the United States experienced the effects of World War I, the American people didn't want to get involved in another war that happened just a few years later. In 1941, most of the world was already at war. Across the Atlantic, Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, had already taken over several European countries, starting in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, followed by Norway, France, Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Nazi Germany continued to rise to power and ultimately formed an alliance with Italy and Japan, widely referred to as the Axis powers. Back at home, the American people didn't want to get involved in the war and saw it primarily as a foreign problem. As the war raged on in Europe, tensions grew between the U.S. and Japan. According to History.com's main article on Pearl Harbor, the now defunct Empire of Japan had already taken over China. Britain and several other European countries were worried about this at the time because they had colonies overseas. They were afraid that Japan would come over and take over their colonies because they had such precious natural resources such as oil that Japan desperately needed in order to continue their expansion. In Linda Suede's Pearl Harbor, more or less, it states the Philippines were under American control and the islands lied right on the way to the French, British, and Dutch colonies. The United States was very much against Japanese expansion into the area. Therefore, President Roosevelt had set up restrictions against American exports of fuel, steel, and scrap metal. This sets Japan into retaliation against the United States. Now, the saddening fact was that the American people never expected an attack from Japan. According to History.com, one of the main reasons was that Hawaii was almost 4,000 miles away from Japan. Thus, an attack was highly unlikely. Therefore, the main naval and airfields of Pearl Harbor lied largely undefended. A confrontation between Japan and the United States was sure to ensue. Shelley Tanaka, a Hawaiian resident, had wrote an article called Attack on Pearl Harbor and recounted the tragic events that took place that fateful day. On Sunday morning, December 7th, just before the sun came up over the Pacific, Japanese aircraft got into the air and launched off the decks of several aircraft carriers. At around 8 a.m., Japanese planes filled the skies over the island of Oahu. People, bombs and bullets from the Japanese rained down against the ships moored below in the shipyard at Pearl Harbor. In his closing statement to Congress, President Roosevelt stated that no matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people, in their righteous might, will win through absolute victory. I believe I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that the will not only we will defend themselves to the utmost, but we will make very certain that this form of treachery shall never happen again. Crippled, battled, and bruised, America, in its most triumphant victory, rose up relatively quickly to win over the Empire of Japan and showed the world its true might.